Rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, this is a special call city council meeting of Tuesday, September 15th, 2015, to deal with the budget and also the tax rates. I can have that in reverse. Mrs. Bach, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Old?
Here.
Mrs. Turner?
Here.
Mr. Kramer?
Here.
Mayor Winger?
Here. Ms. Graves is not here, obviously, tonight, Mrs. Lawson, should I read A first, or should we have public comment first? Which do you recommend?
You, at your discretion, you could have general public comment first, but because these are public hearings, the public is to be allowed to speak and have their questions answered on both of the items before you move them and approve them. So,
okay. Anyone who would like to come forward on the topic of tonight's agenda is invited to do so. May I see your hands or come forward? Yes, Mrs. Moss, come forward, please.
Good evening. Laura Moss, Vero Beach Utilities Commission member at large. It'll be brief. I have two observations. I'm losing my voice from talking to so many people. I tried to speak to a cross-section in the city. The first observation is that the majority of the people to whom I spoke are not in favor of this tax increase. The second observation is that with regard to the budget itself, on page 5, background and budget process, there really isn't any background given, and I would suggest that in the future, or even perhaps you do it this evening, people were unclear as to where the 30% came from last time, originally. The origin of it, is it a mathematical formula that was derived, based on some kind of empirical number? Or just how did that occur? And then the new number, I know, I was here, there was a bit of horse trading, but if you weren't here, you don't necessarily know that. So it would be great if if you actually did have a background and explained, where it came from originally and then where it went after that. Thank you very much.
Ms. Lawson, do you want to comment?
The background material for this budget workshop or the budget hearings included a memo that was on top of the budget ordinance, and that memo actually does describe in detail the items that are being funded through the tax increase. But just to recap, the 24.45% increase over the rollback rate that's in the budget that you have before you now, the primary things that is funding are 2 new police officers in the police department, the replacement of a civilian CSI position with another police officer position, 2 new full-time lifeguards, a recreation coordinator in the rec department, 2 new positions in finance and IT, a salary increase of 3% for all employees, an increase of 4.3% in our health insurance rates, and contributions to the new defined contribution plan. And attachment A to this memo actually spells those things out in terms of total dollar amounts to come up with the $1.1 million in additional taxes.
Ms. Losh, you might recap for the public the process we go, starting with the budget hearings early on and the whole thing that is required under state law and the procedure we go through.
Certainly. Typically in July, you have a full, at this point, 3 days or so of budget workshops where you go through the city manager's draft proposed budget. At the conclusion of that fairly lengthy review, you establish a not-to-exceed millage rate. And then we have 2 public hearings at which that millage rate and the millage rate can be lowered, but not raised from there. And so the first public hearing we had took place on September the 3rd. At that point, the millage rate that that was supporting the budget was about 38% over the rolled back rate, and that is a very specific calculation that's required by the DOR. On September the 3rd, at our first public hearing, you lowered that to a millage of 2.38 to support a budget that had some amendments to it during that meeting. And then we are now here at our final public hearing where, again, you can lower the millage rate but not raise it from the point that you set on September the 3rd. Whatever you adopt tonight, both millage and budget-wise, will be our final millage for the coming fiscal year.
Ms. Moss, are you satisfied with the answer, or would you like to ask additional questions?
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. I would ask, though, just for the public, if it could be under background in the budget, because, if they have to start looking for extra paper, memos or whatever, and I know I've looked at the memorandums and, the additional things that are attached to it, pardon me, but there is no background. You see background and budgetary process, and if you look at the pages, even at the top of the pages, it's just budgetary process. That's all that's there. There's nothing. It says background, then when you go to it, there's no background in this. So that's all I would recommend or suggest. Thank you, though.
I think this is something else also, that the budget workshops are all published, are all on the website. You can look at all of them. And there's minutes to that, and you can go through the whole process and look at all of it.
It's just in the interest of making it easier.
Mrs. Moss, if you have to come forward if you...
Yes, you're right, especially at this point.
Yeah, protect your voice as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for me. It's just in the interest of making it easier for people.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Hetty, you would like to come forward, I see.
Hello, council members. Brian Hetty. I see one candidate for re-election is not here on probably the major thing that the public cares about. The public cares about how candidates feel about the budget and the tax dollars.
Mr. Hetty, campaign, candidates...
How is this?
Okay.
How is this
go
not
ahead.
relative?
No, I'm just saying that, we shouldn't, any of us, campaign, that's all. But go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I apologize.
Do you have a count on how many times you've apologized for interrupting me at this podium over your reign of terror?
Mr. Hetty, please proceed.
Okay, well, I was proceeding, and you threw me off a little bit. But anyway, the point is that the public does care about where candidates and where elected officials stand on how they increase or decrease our tax burden. And Lord Turner, thank you for your position in trying to hold the line. This taxpayer appreciates the heck out of it. Jay Kramer. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your efforts at holding the line. You talk about candidates and elections and whatnot, Mr. Mayor. There's a national interest right now in candidates, and the debate often gets off track. And it's, instead of being on presidential things, instead of being on a budget, becomes on a pretty face, And I can tell you that if you want a pretty face, go down to the city clerk's office. There's 4 of them, but there's no pretty face in here. There's no pretty face on this budget at all. And then on the thing that is most important to the taxpayers, someone seeking re-election, Ms. Graves, isn't even here.
She's got a family emergency that was pretty serious.
The taxpayers continually foot the bill for any extravagance, anything that elected officials and government officials want. And very rarely do you see where the officials actually look to decrease the tax burden on the taxpayers. And this is just another example here in the city of Vero Beach where you're going to add to our tax burden. There's not much that we can do and or say that'll stop that, and that's a real shame. And as far as campaigning, I hope that some viewers do see what you do and how your campaign of increase on their burden has saddled them over the years.
Thank you for your comments. Further public comment? Yes, come forward, ma'am.
I'm Nancy McCown, and I live on Ocean Drive. And I don't think really anybody would care about a tax increase if it was to get rid of the electric company. And where we would then have a 50% tax increase, but we'd also have probably a 50% decrease in our electric bills, and we can deduct the amount of taxes we pay, not our electrical fees, which are obviously out of sight. Give a tax increase, fine, but get rid of the electric company.
Thanks for your comment, ma'am. Further public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. That brings us to number A. Do you want to read that, Mrs. Bach, please?
Sure. An ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, providing the levy of ad valorem taxes for the fiscal year 2015-2016 at a millage rate of 2.3800, which equates to 2.3800 per 1,000 of assessed property value.
All right. Is there? There's two ways. First of all, we have to have public comment on this specifically, but there's two ways we might proceed. We might proceed talking about A and B together, but they have to be voted on separately. Correct? Is there any more background on A that you need to give us, Mrs. Lawson?
The only thing we need to make sure we do is after whatever motion and before the vote that we read Section 1 and Section 2 of this into the record before the vote.
All right. Is there a question from council on this?
Is this one of those issues where you want to table A and then talk about B?
I leave that to council.
Well, I mean, I'd like to talk about the budget. I mean, unfortunately, Amelia is not here. She did present another budget, which I'm immensely interested in, and I'd like to see what council's take is on it.
Do you want to read B into the record, Mrs. Bach?
You should go ahead and make a motion to table A first.
Make a motion to table A.
I'll second it. Is it agreeable?
Yeah.
All in favor? Aye. All in favor?
And Mr. Kramer, I guess I'm very interested. Amelia's new budget. I haven't seen. Is this?
That was the one that she handed out that last meeting.
Was it the last hearing? That was the handout from the last hearing.
Correct.
Okay. Wasn't sure what document you were talking about.
Essentially, what
Vice Mayor, why don't you let Tammy go ahead and read the title?
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
Start on that discussion.
An ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, adopting the annual budget of the city for the fiscal year beginning October 1st, 2015, and ending September 30th, 2016, appropriating funds for the operating expenses, supplies, and personnel, and otherwise appropriating funds for the efficient and effective operation of the government of the City of Vero Beach and its departments, such appropriations being from anticipated revenue, providing a means to amend the annual budget to carry forward the funding of purchase orders, work orders, and grants outstanding as of September 30th, 2015, providing a means to amend the annual budget to reflect grants received after September 30th, 2015, and authorizing the transfer of funds appropriated so long as the total combined appropriations shall not be increased, thereby providing an effective date.
Mr. Kramer, would you like the floor?
Okay. Again, I was talking about Mrs. Graves' budget that she had put forward last time, which really looked like she had backed off on the transfer of the capital projects by $450,000, and then weaned off of the using the reserves by $300,000. And I was going to throw it out there to the council of maybe using this budget and then submitting the budget surplus for the capital projects.
The budget that she proposed last time had two primary elements to it. It was the elimination of the $450,000 transfer and the funding of the 2012B debt service for $694,000 from fund balance. We've already taken that first action. Your voted budget from September the 3rd eliminated the $450,000 transfer. So the only other, and did some other things besides, actually reduced some positions, which were not in hers. So the only other major element of her proposal that's not already in your budget would be to pay the debt service for 2012B, the $694, from fund balance rather than current year funds. And that would put you essentially at her proposal or lower in terms of millage.
Well, I really don't want to go into the last meeting, but I'd like to be able to use the budget surplus for this year for capital projects. I don't know if that involves a transfer or whether that can go just right there.
What's the amount of the projected budget surplus for this year?
I don't think we're talking about the same thing. You're talking about using fund balance, not budget surplus, correct?
Well, if you're doing it in this year, I'm talking about using fund balance for the 629, and then you've got the 450 for the transfer to the capital projects. Using the budget surplus for the transfer to the capital projects, it probably won't come up to 450.
The nomenclature, though, at this point, budget surplus. So
Correct.
Essentially, you'd be budgeting for next fiscal year for revenues less than current year expenditures, and you would be depleting whatever fund balance you actually have in next year. So if your fund balance rises a little at the end of this fiscal year, you can't apply it. It'll just be part of fund balance. So essentially, we're back to the issue of, do you want to budget a budget where revenues are greater than expenses, or where revenues are less than expenses and some of the expenses are funded by fund balance?
So what we could do is just not budget for the transfer to the capital projects and then do a budget amendment once those things are known?
You can always do a budget amendment. The only thing that you can't amend after this point is the millage rate. So,
right.
Yes. I mean, you can always do a budget amendment.
Well, I like the work that she did. I like the 11.79%. I mean, that's the lowest that I've seen of any of the budgets that comes out there, and it looks like it works.
It would actually be less than that because what you did September the 3rd went farther than her original proposal. So her original proposal was eliminate the 450 and pay the 694 from fund balance. What you did on September 3rd was eliminate the 450, eliminate a couple of positions for about another $100,000, and as well as the $45,000 for dunes. So if you were to now take that final part of her proposal and pay the debt service from fund balance, it would actually be lower than the 11.7.
The problem with that is the lack of a roadmap. In other words, we don't have a policy as to what the fund balance should be. And lacking that, as much as I'm sympathetic to that, we're deficit spending. And I don't want to deficit.
That just rings all the wrong bells for me and for creditors and stuff, and I just think that's something we don't want to step on.
So, I mean, we lack a tool, but lacking the tool, it's deficit spending. Much as I don't like it.
Well, it's not deficit spending, because the definition of that is spending borrowed money to pay expenses when they exceed revenues, and we're not borrowing it. We've got the money to do it. The money that we're using to spend on it doesn't belong to somebody else. It's ours.
It's ours, but it's still deficit. We're budgeting a deficit budget for the year. Less revenues than expenses.
I looked up the definition of deficit spending, the spending of borrowed money by a government when expenditures exceeds revenue. Borrowed, the use of something that belongs to somebody else with the intent of returning it. It doesn't belong to somebody else. We've got the money to do it.
That's not GAAP. Cindy, would you help out here?
Regardless of what you call it, what you will have is a budget that shows that current year revenues are less than current year expenditures by $600,000, $700,000, $800,000. What your CAFR will show is the same. It will show revenues and transfers in, expenditures and transfers out, and a deficit amount, in parentheses, denoting a negative, that reduces your fund balance from the beginning of the year to the end of the year.
I quite understand that. The question is desire. Do you want to raise the taxes, or do you want to try to get through to the lowest amount? It's desire. You can make it happen, Cindy.
And, well, again, this is a policy decision, and I want to be really clear about this, that you are, as a council, perfectly able to adopt a budget of that type, and that is absolutely a policy decision.
The other thing is that is a reoccurring cost. Next year we have that $690,000 again.
And then it comes out.
But we still would have it next year, so we'd be faced with that similar situation.
And we've
Right.
also created a budget that expands the size of our government. We're adding in 8 more positions in our general fund. So you know that whatever, this tax increase, that's going to increase all our employee costs for the following year as well. So,
Well,
and the budget doesn't include anything for stormwater repair, replacement, or putting in filters for the lagoon at all. 0. And it doesn't address the other post-employment benefit liability that we've still had hanging out there. So
the problem is that we've got 4 people here, and we got to have 3 yeses.
Well, I wish we had a policy. You know, this is an old saying from long ago. If wishes were horses, we would all ride. It's ridiculous. But the point is, I wish we had a reserve policy. Lacking a reserve policy, I think we're deficit spending. If we had a reserve policy, I'd feel differently about it. I would have to weigh in with Mr. Old, as much as in my heart I don't want to. So I think there's sort of the 3 that feel one way, and sympathetically I'm with you, but we don't have the tool.
I don't have a problem making a policy at 35%. That's what Homestead did. I mean, if anybody knows what can happen, it's Homestead.
You know, again, a policy, as we've talked about, would, at least the draft policy I would bring to you, would have more than one number. It would have layers for both minimal cash flow, for budgetary stabilization, for emergency reserves. But more importantly, at least the draft policy that I intend to propose, that I think the city manager agrees with, is that if you do budget to spend fund balance in any given year, that it would be on non-recurring expenditures, on one-time expenditures. So certainly the debt service that will recur again next year would not fall into that category of the proposal that I would be making. But again, I want to be perfectly clear. This is absolutely a policy decision, and it's not about me making it happen. It's
If
it's up to you.
this was a business, it would be one thing, but it's a government. And in government, we have to have transparency. And before we have a policy on things that affect the public, many things, this in particular, I think it has to go through the chairs. It has to go to finance. It has to be thought about. It has to be thrown out there. Is this a good idea? And if it was a business, frankly, I'd feel differently about it, but it's not. And we have to have that transparency. We see that in all we do. So, again, I'm sympathetic to it, but I have to say, with the rules we have in front of us, we're deficit spending. And
I think actually, if we did set up a policy, the policy would forbid reserves to be used for deficit spending.
and recurring expenses.
And recurring expenses, yeah.
I don't know what the policy would say, but we don't have a policy.
No, we don't. We don't.
I have no idea what the policy would say. It's out. Randy, you're a banker, senior league. It's not mine. And as a businessman, I'd handle it differently. But
Well, even as a business, you don't often budget losses.
yeah, I have. I mean, when I had to for a year or two,
Well, you got taxes to worry about. It's a little different. You can actually work with it,
So I think the general consensus is that, the same as it was before, that we're not willing to cross over that bridge. Maybe we will in the future, but as much as I'd like to cross over and take the heat off, but
well, you got to count to 3.
well, I hear a general consensus of 3 of us that aren't ready to take that step. I'll make a motion but I'd rather not. I mean, I don't.
Well, before you do, don't forget public comment again.
Yeah, this whole topic of essentially how many dollars reserve do we have in the general fund, forgetting all the other funds, Cindy?
About $9.4 million.
And then what percentage of that is of our expenditures?
If you look at the current year budgeted expenditures of $22 million, that's somewhere between 40 and 43.
How much?
40 and 43%.
43%. If the question that we're considering is, and this is a truism, in a given year, if the city budgets, what was the number, 21 million what, Cindy?
Your total expenditure budget for this coming fiscal year, where it stands right now, is $22 million.
Okay, if we budget 22 million and we only spend 21 million 8, what happens to the other 200,000?
It stays in your fund balance.
It stays in the fund balance, but in effect, in the final analysis, what happens is the 9.4 million goes up to 9.6 million.
And you can't spend it.
And we can't spend it, and in effect, what we've done is, in the final analysis, at some point, the money needs to go back to the public in some form.
But you also, if you look at your last 6 or 8, 10-year history, you've had years where just the opposite has happened, and your fund balance compared to your original budget. Because I think the problem that people are having is they're comparing the final expenditures to the amended budget, which is always going to be less, because that's the reason you amend your budget. When you compare your final expenditures to your original budget, 3 years ago, you went the other direction by almost $600,000. And so you have not consistently every year had a fund balance that's gone up. You've had a fund balance across 10 years that's gone up and down and up and down. And I think that's the reason we're proposing a policy that includes layers, so that you've got a layer that you can dip into and out of for budget stabilization without dipping into your core funds.
Well, this is a topic that we're going to have to decide. A city council will have to decide, probably the next one, not this one. But if there's any member of the public that would like to talk about fund balances and policies on it, I think we should have a lot of weighing in of that over time, in my opinion. Is there anyone who wants to talk about it? More than willing to listen. Seeing nobody, then I'll close that.
Just one thing to keep in perspective is that, we have the enterprise funds, which a lot of cities don't. I looked at the Florida League of Cities. Their average reserve fund is about 21.5% of general budget. Quite frankly, with the amount of reserves that we have, we can actually survive for 2 years without having any taxes at all. We have $9.4 million to defend about $4.5 million of tax revenue coming in. So I mean, we're quite askew compared to a lot of other cities, in that we don't rely totally upon our taxes coming in. I mean, just for knowledge.
It's a truism.
But it's also true that just for instance, of the last 11 years, 5 of those years, your fund balance has actually decreased as compared to your original budget, not increased. So the idea that there's been just a constant, steady upward progression is actually not factually the case. And that's okay, because when you set a budget, you're setting a budget now for everything that's going to happen to you for the next 14 months. You couldn't possibly know, and particularly in, with some of the volatility that we have, what all of that entails. And so, but that, that is the reason that it's good to have a discussion and have the policy. You don't want it to accumulate endlessly, but the fact is it hasn't actually done that. And right now you're about back where you were in, say, like 2005, 06. You're about back to that level right now. So it's waxed and waned over the years, over the last 10 years.
Also, just for informational purposes, in my experience, when you have fund balance and you want to expend it, you pick a project, for example, a new pool for recreation, or you build a police department, or you build a city hall, or you move a sewer plant. I mean, there's various things, but you usually pick a project that you have the cash infusion to do. And that's another one of the reasons that you carry a fund balance. The primary reason, though, is to show the financial integrity of your community. I mean, there's still people running around here who seem to think that bankruptcy is our solution, and the fact of the matter is that financially we're pretty healthy, the mere fact that we're talking about this at this point.
Yeah, we're A+, Fitch A+, for what it's worth.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, well, come forward. By all means, Mr. Day. This is a topic we should talk about quite a bit over the future. I don't know that we can resolve it
Thank you,
tonight.
Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Council. For the record, Ken Dake, 1846 21st Avenue. Since we're discussing the fund balance going forward, a city of this size and what we do, how much is needed to stay in the fund balance? What is the number? And what is the number today? We said we have, or you all said, you have $9.4 million in the fund balance at this time. Is that correct, Madam Finance?
At this point in time, we have $9.4 million, which is 42.6% of current year expenditures. As far as what the number should be, there is no hard and fast rule. If you look at the guidance, people range between 25 and I've seen 45. It depends heavily on the volatility of your revenue sources, where you sit relative to the possibility of natural disasters, and other factors like proposed borrowing and things like that. So unfortunately, no one, not GFOA or Florida League of Cities or anyone, will come along and tell you one size fits all 25%, one size fits all 30%. So it really is something, as the mayor has said and the vice mayor has said, that we really need to have a serious conversation about what I consider to be some of the best fund balance policies I've seen, and the one that I'm modeling the draft after. Actually, it isn't a single number. It's basically a no-go zone that you have to have for cash flow, because you have a few months where you get no revenues in. Another zone that you use for budget stabilization, for instance, you don't budget for dune repairs, but occasionally they happen, and when they do, they're $100,000+. So you've got a layer to handle those ups and downs, which we see have occurred in the last 10 years, and perhaps even a specific amount of money set aside for the possibility of hurricanes. A council about 9 or 10 years ago deemed that number to be about $2 million. So, that's part of the conversation. What are the elements? What are the risk factors that we need to take into consideration?
So going forward, when you folks take a look at a policy for this fund balance, which is attached to the general fund, correct? This fund balance?
Yes.
So you'll be creating a policy, and you'll figure out what is a safe zone for this city. How much does the fund balance have to have in it? Then you'll decide going forward what the monies can be used for when you adopt your policy going forward. How far in the future will that be?
Mrs. Lawson?
It's my plan to have a draft of that policy in front of the Finance Commission in the first quarter of the fiscal year, sometime between October and December. How long it takes to reach a conclusion, I don't know, but we'll have a good starting point then. The other element of a fund balance policy, though, as the city manager pointed out, is once you have what you consider to be surplus, what can you spend it on? Fund balance is not a recurring revenue source, and so that comes back to the idea that it's also restricted to be spent on true one-time expenditures. If you need a roof on Leisure Square, if you want to make a one-time injection into your pension fund to close the funding gap, things that you're not then starting upside, you're not starting upside down by that much when you begin the following year's budget. So that's a big part of it as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Going forward with your budget or your tax hearing, will you have more public input because this closes the fund balance portion, or is this it?
Well, no. What we're talking about right now is B is where Mr. Kramer took us, and was there a way using the fund balance, as I understand it, to reduce the need for taxes, and the consensus, we don't have everybody here tonight, is that probably not something we can do without a policy, and that the policy cannot exist without true vetting and going to the Finance Commission and being talked about in the community. That we ad hoc, it would not be a good thing for us to do ad hoc.
So if I understand you correctly, Mr. May, you are moving forward with what you all talked about at your last tax meeting.
Well, I think the next question, like onto Mr. Daig, would be if other people have other ideas. Let me take it circularly on you. We have to vote on each of these, first A and then B. A is the tax and B is the budget behind it. The way this process starts is we develop a budget and then we work through that budget and then we try to reduce that budget. So we're talking about B right now, and Mr. Kramer made a suggestion that Mrs. Graves also had made of a way to accomplish it. And, the sense tonight is that there are three of us that wouldn't do that tonight. But that still leaves us the possibility of talking about other reductions in B that would drive down the tax. But it is circular in that if we don't drive down the tax, to have a balanced budget, the tax rate that's in this proposal then holds, because otherwise we're deficit spending.
Understood.
So if you have suggestions for further decreases, we'd like to have them.
I wanted to hear what you folks are going to decrease and remove from the budget first. Thank you, because you all know there's things out there that need to be done, so I just want to hear if you're going to take things out from what you talked about at the last meeting. So far, you left the improvements in Leisure Square was mentioned this evening. That's a big one. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Well, possibly the very biggest one is a pay increase for our employees. That's possibly the very biggest one. And at this point, nothing's changed. We're interested in comments, Mrs. Turner or anyone else. Is there anyone from the public? I mean, we're open to suggestions of, what Mrs. Lawson has said is what we're funding. It's in the preparation for this meeting. I sat through the hearings. We made changes. I don't have any further suggestions personally. Anyone else that does, I think we need to hear from them.
I'm happy with the way this is done. We've spent a long time on this and gone through it in great detail, and I don't see any further cutting.
Anyone from the public?
And I'll just say I've certainly made my position very clear on the issue that the public is not seeing a 30% increase in their income. Once again, the city needs to live within its means. We're expanding the size of our government, adding positions, which, are wonderful. That's great. But we can't afford it. And to think that to go to the taxpayers and think that they're a never-ending source of revenue.
Mrs. Turner, I would be happy for you to make a motion on any specific items you like. I will second it. I'm not saying I'll vote for it, but I'm interested in anything that will reduce the expenses.
Since I haven't been able to get a second yet, Mr.
Well, no, I will.
I'll leave it at that. You have someone at the podium.
I have a question. My name's John. I live at 2815 11th Avenue, Vero Beach. When was the last time you all had pay increases? Who all is getting a pay increase, and when was the last time the pay increase was?
2 years ago was the last one, and this is 3%. It would apply to everyone if we approve the contracts. For example, in the agenda for the next meeting, the Teamsters Union voted unanimously to accept the 3% and a 3-year contract. If the City Council accepts that contract, then that would be 3% would apply to all those employees. The police union we have not come to agreements with, but this budget would allow us to negotiate up to 3%.
And the last one was 2 years ago. The last one was 2 years ago. And is this an annual discussion? The pay increase is an annual discussion?
Yes, sir, it is.
I mean, I'm just looking, we're $18 trillion as a nation in debt. Okay? And I'm saying to myself, we have just as many people on food stamps in this country, this is the size of the population of Canada. And you people are sitting up here telling me that you're talking about a pay increase every year at 3%?
No, sir.
I mean, I'm shocked.
It's not every year.
Where are we living? What are we looking at here? I mean, there are the unemployment rate in this country is out of control. It's out of control. Or do we? I don't get it. How we can be sitting here talking about having the people pay you all a raise every year or every other year at 3%, 1.5%. I don't care. I mean, 1.5% maybe considerable. I don't understand it. And pensions and everything else. I'm scratching my head. I just don't get it. Where's the money coming from?
Mr. O'Connor,
Where's it coming from?
you starting back in 2008, you might give a history for the gentleman.
Thank you.
A history.
Thank you for your time.
No, it's a good question. We had a pay freeze. We go through the history of it.
We had not only a pay freeze, but we had the day off for everyone, and then we went through that. which was a pay decrease actually. Then the next year we changed it, and management took the pay decrease to equal the amount in order to have the other employees not take the day off. And then we went from that to a pay increase of the 3%, I believe, wasn't it, Cindy?
I think it was after 5 years.
After 5 years. So it was 5 years that we had two decreases. Then we had 3% after 5 years, and then this would be 3% after 2 years. So it equaled somewhere in the neighborhood of less than 1% a year.
And we also had about 30%. We reduced our staff by about 30%.
Yes, sir, that's accurate as well.
All right, further public comment. I mean, it's a good comment, and our raises have not, what did you say, Jim, over time they've averaged 1%, something like that?
A little less than 1% if you look at over the last 5-6 years.
So the decrease was 5%, 4.62 for 2 years. Right?
All right, that circles us back to A then. If there's no further comment about B, we'll come back to B again. And A is an ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, providing the levy ad valorem taxes for the fiscal year 2015 and 16 at a millage rate of 2.380, which equates to 0.238 per 1,000 of assessed property value. That's what's on the agenda. That equates to $34 per 100,000 of assessment. Is there further discussion of this, or do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion.
If I could, before the... As written, this ordinance says in Section 1, the City of Vero Beach, Florida shall levy a general ad valorem tax of 2.3800 mils against the value of all real and tangible personal property within the city limits, subject to taxation on the first day of January 2015 to finance current operating expenses of the city. The tax shall be assessed and collected in the manner provided by law. Section 2, the fiscal year 2015-2016 operating millage rate of 2.3800 levied hereby is greater than the rolled back millage rate of 1.9124 mils by 24.45%.
All right, there's a motion. I'll second it. Is there further discussion? No discussion, Mrs. Bach?
Mr. Old?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
No.
Mr. Kramer?
No.
Mayor Winger?
Yes. All right, 2-2. And we can't end 2-2.
Millage has to be adopted by a majority vote.
I beg your pardon?
The millage rate has to be adopted by a majority vote.
You know, one of the interesting things about Vero Beach is that we've got an immense diversity among our population. There's an awful lot of people that can't afford a tax increase. And I can just tell you a quick story that when I worked with United Way and I did volunteer income tax assistance, you do come across a lot of people in Vero Beach that kind of fit this saying that they're house rich and cash poor. There's a lot of people that own some very wealthy real estate but don't have a lot of money, and they lived on fixed incomes. And this is kind of my reasoning for trying to hold the line on this. I don't see the reason to get out there and raise these taxes. We did it last year. You know, I'm probably okay for a small tax increase this time, but you know, not to the tune of what we're doing right now.
Well, we haven't had a tax increase for many years. Mrs. Lawson, when was the last one? When was the last tax change?
Last was a decrease, actually.
It was a decrease.
We went to rollback last year.
Yeah, we went to rollback 1 year.
Means you're paying more money.
Actually, the actual tax revenue collected has fallen pretty steadily since 2007, and we had a small increase last year. So, and we've held the same millage rate for 3 years running, and before that it was actually 1.93, so just very slightly lower. But the actual taxes collected have gone down from a peak of about 5.7 in 2009 to 4.1 last year. So
Valuations.
Right. If the 2-2 vote is to stand, I will call a special city council meeting on the 22nd of September.
Mayor, you would need to recess this meeting specifically and schedule it for that date and time, and we would do the proper public
All right,
notice.
tell me how I do that.
First of all, I think because of the circumstances, the council should probably find that there's extenuating circumstances. Let me get the actual language. Due to circumstances beyond the control of the council, you would like to recess this meeting and continue it until, you said the 22nd, at what time?
22nd at 5:15.
Is that Tuesday?
I beg your pardon?
Is the 22nd Tuesday? I'm sorry, I don't have
Yes,
the calendar.
it is.
It is.
Okay. And yes, it would have to be after 5 p.m., so 5:15 would be fine.
At 5:15.
Next Tuesday, okay.
That's your motion?
That's my motion.
I'll second.
Ms. Zavak?
Mr. Old?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
No.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mayor Winger?
Yes, it passes 3-1. Does that conclude the business of this meeting?
Well, you would also be continuing
Attorney.
B, the second
I'll make a
ordinance
motion to
on the budget.
continue B for the 22nd.
I will second it. Mrs. Bach?
Old?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
No.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mayor Winger?
Yes. Does that conclude the business of this meeting?
That's up to you.
Motion to adjourn?
One question.
You
Yes,
cannot
by all
adjourn the
means.
meeting. You have
Okay.
continued the meeting, you have
Continued.
recessed the meeting, you are not adjourning the meeting. That is the one thing that you need to.
Continuing the meeting until 5:15 on the 22nd, which is Tuesday.
You're not adjourning it, you're
Right.
recessing it.
All right, we continue.
Quick question. I realize that with these tax hearings, there's particular public notification required. As we're suspending this, do we need to have another public noticing of it?
Yes.
Or will we?
That will be done.
The continuance has to be advertised, and it'll be advertised on Friday, which is what will allow you to have a meeting, a continuation on Tuesday.
Yeah, we were
Thank you.
complying with
Yeah.
all those notifications and for the public.
Yeah, we'll be
Thank you.
advertising that on Friday. The continuance will be advertised on Friday for.
All right, I'll make a motion continuing this meeting till the 22nd at 5:15. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 4-0.
Excuse me.
That then would adjourn this meeting?
Do not
No,
adjourn
you
the
just
meeting.
recess that meeting.
You just recess the
No,
meeting.
that would
You're done.
recess this meeting.
Yes.
Yes.
All
You're
right.
done now.
So then you have to open up another.
You can open your new meeting.
Do you want to, are we going right into the other meeting then?
Mayor, can we just take a few minutes? Holt needs to switch over.
Yes, let's take a break to 6:15. It's 13 minutes in the clock at the head of the room.